Welcome. My name is Niloufar Hidayat, host of today's event. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused unprecedented challenges, leading to a major disruption of all of our societies and our education systems. Now, the right to education of nearly 1.6 billion learners has been affected in more than 190 countries across all continents. Nobody has been spared. But even before the pandemic, the world was already in education crisis, with over 258 million out-of-school children and youth and 773 illiterate adults. The crisis has damaged education systems in high-income countries as well as those who live in poverty. But without a doubt, it has had visceral damage, and it's been done to make worse the access to quality education for the already marginalized and vulnerable communities, including girls, women, people with disabilities, and those affected by conflict and insecurity, including refugees and internally displaced people. We cannot afford letting the exacerbated education crisis become a generational catastrophe. More than ever, the global education community, high-income and low-income countries must unite to protect quality education by making it a key priority for all recovery efforts, especially in the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, and we must build back education.
زمانم خلیل رحمان ده زه افغان مهاجرین سکول ته ځم دریم کلاس کې سبق وایم زما سبق سره ډېر شوق ده زه ډاکټر جوړېدل غواړم
It is against this background that we meet here today to mark the 3rd International Day of Education, live at the Shafallah Center for Children with Special Needs in Doha, which is connected to the world through an online webinar hosted by the Education Above All Foundation. So we know that education is a key to post-COVID-19 pandemic recovery. And today we are asking the big question: how can we prevent a generational catastrophe? Let's get started. We're going to get to work today to brainstorm this urgent question. First, let's go over to the Shafallah Center, where Mohammed Munir, a student at Shafallah, will open the event with these special remarks.
محمد منير في هذا اليوم المميز أرحب بجميع الحضور للاحتفال بالتعليم معا. أتمنى لكم احتفالية سعيدة في هذا اليوم الدولي للتعليم.
September the 9th, 2020, to mark the inaugural UN Day to protect education from attack, Shakira joined the call of global leaders to end all violent attacks on schools, teachers, and learners. As a young girl, Shakira witnessed the suffering of street children who slept in the park each night, and she vowed to help them someday. She founded the Barefoot Foundation back in 1995, which helps the children of displaced and vulnerable communities exercise their rights to quality education. Today, on International Education Day, we welcome back Shakira Mubarak to raise her voice in a call for action to build back education. Shakira.
School is not only a place of learning, but also of safety and nourishment. Even before COVID-19, the world was already in an education crisis with over 258 million children out of school. And the pandemic has only exacerbated pre-existing inequalities in learning opportunities. To truly recover, we must ensure quality, inclusive, accessible, and equitable education for all, promoting targeted public spending and investing in digital infrastructure to help bridge the digital divide. Education, although hard hit by COVID-19, can be a key driver of the recovery process, turning this crisis into an opportunity. My foundation, Pies Descalzos, is proud to work with Educate a Child and Educate Above All to unite, to protect, and build back better for a brighter future for our children and generations to come.
Thank you, Shakira. Now, artists and young people understand the transformative power of quality education that allows learning as well as imagination and play. So now we will give voice to our online youth participants from around the world, and a special message from another global artist, the British screen and theatre actor Karen Bryson, MBE, who advocates for the rights of children and women.
It is so heartwarming to see all the positivity and ambition in the youth voices we've just heard. Their hopes for a brighter 2021, despite facing the greatest challenges in our living history. It shows how much energy and meaningful contribution can be driven and created by young people, and why it is so important to involve them actively during the education recovery process. Let's not forget the incredible work that's been achieved so far. The awareness being raised, the global discussions before and during this pandemic, and now the vital discussions around the road that needs to be travelled as we move forward. We need to walk the talk on the ground with the generation that matters. How can we ensure we achieve all the aspirations in 2021 and beyond? In post-COVID recovery, it is essential that education is a priority, not just for the few elite countries, but for all. As always, the most marginalized who are already deprived of their right to education are the ones most affected. Lack of access to healthcare, safety and education, and also technology to access education remotely to continue learning will always affect the poorest states. Communication and positioning is also a crucial component to get right. In advocating for the right to education, we must pay attention to the youth and engage them in their language and tone, rather than speak at them with evidence, data, and advocacy with no relevance to their day-to-day experiences. While these details are important to give us all perspective, we must be able to appeal directly to the imagination and the aspirations of children and youths. One of the most impactful ways to do this is through the creative medium of the arts. This aspect may seem less important in the grand scheme of things as we look at the agenda of how we build back education. But imagination in our children and youth is so, so important. In order for that to be realized in a meaningful way, it needs guidance to nurture that imagination, to inspire and motivate. It can plant the seeds for the thirst for knowledge and growth. It enables thoughts and dreams for the wealth of possibilities for a brighter future. It inspires hope. Can we tell ourselves we have built back society together, stronger, for our children and youth? Let me finish by quoting the lyrics from a popular song. I believe children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride.
And so it is that with pride, determination, and enthusiasm, we continue the show. For those of you who are joining us on every continent on Earth via this webinar, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. We are dedicated to making the next hour and so we have an educational and an entertaining one from you. Thank you to my speakers so far and the ones we're about to talk to. Now, it's already clear that we all have our part to play in the fight to protect education. Education, as you've seen, is not a luxury. It is the fundamental right given to every human being by virtue of being born. There is no other way to say it. As we move forward towards discussing solutions with global leaders and policymakers, it is my absolute pleasure first to introduce Lulua Al-Khatil, Assistant Foreign Minister and spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Qatar, to give the opening keynote address. Her Excellency is the author of a book addressing the educational needs of the labour market, and crucially, she has led the daily government communications for citizens and residents of Qatar during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please, with your remarks. Lulwa,
Thank you very much, Nell, for the opportunity. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 2020 was an exceptional year for the international community, which saw its progress impeded by a situation developing beyond its control and directly threatening its well-being. We discover yet again that in any existential crisis, be it wars or pandemics, education is one of the first victims. The pandemic has left its stamp on our education systems, exacerbating the inequalities that we had been grappling to balance throughout the last few decades. As the disease swept across the globe, almost 94% of students worldwide in all education levels were affected by the closure of schools, and up to 99% in low and lower middle-income countries. Around 40 million children worldwide have missed out on an early childhood education in their critical preschool year. This will compromise their long-term development, especially those who come from disadvantaged and low-income households. The crisis is all the more devastating for low and lower middle-income countries, as estimates point towards the pandemic further aggravating the education sector's financing gap towards SDG 4 and increasing the already staggering amount of $148 billion to reach as much as $200 billion annually. Yet, as it is the human way, the restrictions enforced upon us stimulated innovation, the progress made on virtual platforms, and their development is uplifting, providing access to education for millions of students globally. This is not to say that they have come to replace traditional educational means. The shift to virtual realities was certainly a learning process itself, but we are now utilizing virtual means in a smarter way than in the past, a way that touches people all over the world. But, alas, it is also important to note, at least a third of the world's school children were unable to access remote learning during school closures. Among the most vulnerable were refugees, forcibly displaced children, and many who live in regions with limited or no connectivity coverage. In that regard, education above all must be commended for their commitment to ensure that all children have access to quality education. Their Educated Child program has already reached more than 9.2 million out-of-school children, helping and nurturing the voices of the next generation. Our discussion should thus outline a new future for the global education system. And our process of redefinition must be inclusive of the marginalized youth, thereby encouraging all voices as to ascertain that the picture we paint for the future of education accounts for all. The pandemic taught us the bitter lesson by exposing the brittle areas in the foundation of the education sector. As we focus on building, we must aim to achieve resilient education systems that would not be shaken by turbulent situations. We could achieve this through establishing regular coordination and cooperation, governance across sectors, particularly in the fields of education, protection, and health. In our action plan at the State of Qatar for dealing with the pandemic, we made sure to create joint panels between all sectors to ensure close communication. And we have seen incredible collaborative efforts between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Public Health. Their close cooperation allowed for the safe and gradual resumption of schooling through implementing hybrid learning, by having effective measures in place to protect the health of both students and teachers. And thus, we cannot sit aside and let this pandemic cause a generational catastrophe. We cannot afford the erasure of decades of progress. We are here because we know that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Recovery takes time. Building will take effort. But I'm confident in our ability as a global community to overcome hardships and work towards securing a prosperous future for all students globally. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for those opening remarks on this very important day. Now, we all want to place learning at the heart of a post-COVID-19 reality. But we know that in order to do so, we will have to make certain commitments. We know that education has been severely affected during this time. And what are the recommendations and strategies for the recovery process? Well, we are joined by a host of global thought leaders, policymakers, and students themselves to talk about both their experiences, what they're seeing on the front lines, and also to shed some light on what we can do moving forward. First up, Maria Victoria Angelou Gonzalez, the Minister of National Education for Colombia. Minister Gonzalez has experience of how we work together in a global community, as well as regional and national experience of the challenges that we will face. She spoke to me earlier to join our conversation.
Un saludo muy especial a Su Alteza Sheikha Moza, también al doctor Mazen Yassim Jaida, y un saludo también muy especial al señor Fahad Al-Sulaiti y a todos quienes hacen parte de este diálogo tan interesante, liderado obviamente por organizaciones como UNESCO, con quien hemos venido trabajando en el marco de esta pandemia, y las organizaciones que hoy generosamente nos invitan, Education About All y Fundación Qatar. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad para compartir retos y desafíos en el marco de la pandemia. Para Colombia, en el marco de la garantía del derecho a la educación, liderado por el presidente Iván Duque, el trabajo de la educación en pandemia ha sido uno de los trabajos más retadores. No solamente se desarrollaron plataformas, televisión, radio, escenarios virtuales y escenarios sincrónicos y asincrónicos para maestros, directivos, padres de familia. Ese era un primer deber, pero también se generó los primeros pasos a definir lineamientos desde el año anterior para un retorno gradual, progresivo y seguro. Se le dio a la educación el primer lugar en el presupuesto, y esto no es solamente con ocasión a la pandemia. Por tercer año consecutivo en el gobierno de Colombia, los derechos de los niños y las niñas y el presupuesto de la educación es lo primero en la agenda. Obviamente, este respaldo de todas las organizaciones del Ejecutivo y del Legislativo nos permitió contar con los recursos para desde el año anterior iniciar educación en casa, reforzar los esfuerzos para que la alimentación escolar llegara a cada una de las casas, una inversión muy fuerte que dará frutos este año en entrega de computadores, teléfonos, conectividad. Ya han sido adjudicados todos los procesos de conectividad que nos permitirán sumar más de 15.000 escuelas en el año 2021 conectadas. Iniciamos pilotajes en el segundo semestre del año anterior, dotando a las escuelas de los recursos para iniciar procesos de mejoramientos de infraestructura, de dotación de tecnología, pero también de comprar todos los elementos de bioseguridad. Estos pilotos fueron muy positivos porque nos demostraron que es posible y que es prioritario, porque tal como lo dice la invitación a este encuentro y a este diálogo, han sido muchas las consecuencias en el proceso de aprendizaje de los niños, las competencias socioemocionales y en todas las familias. Es por ello que es inminente que todos trabajemos en equipo por este retorno gradual, progresivo y seguro. En la primera semana de febrero estaremos dando los primeros pasos en las regiones donde las condiciones de salud lo permiten. Esto también ha requerido una reflexión pedagógica. También la pandemia ha traído lecciones de innovación y de nuevas formas de encuentro a la educación y de un formato multiplataforma que puede ser muy útil incluso para el retorno en la presencialidad, y nos deja este legado para poder llegar a las zonas rurales en múltiples plataformas. Trabajar de la mano de los rectores, de los maestros. Tenemos un proyecto muy importante, Contacto Maestro, de formación continuada, postgradual, formación situada y la Escuela de Liderazgo de Rectores. Esperamos que esto sea fundamental a la hora de hacer una propuesta académica justamente para esta reapertura de las escuelas, y también la importancia de no solo trabajar una agenda académica, de trabajar una agenda en materia socioemocional, en materia ciudadana, que es tan importante para los niños, para los jóvenes y para sus familias. Por eso la Escuela de Padres también ha sido un legado que nos ha dejado esta pandemia, una relación mucho más estrecha con los padres de familia que tenemos que cosechar durante el 2021. Y si ponemos el foco en lo académico y en lo socioemocional, contarles que en Colombia pudimos crear el sistema Evaluar para Avanzar, un sistema hecho de la mano del Instituto Nacional de Evaluación que busca identificar dónde están las brechas de aprendizaje en matemáticas, en lenguaje, en ciencias, también en lo socioemocional, y tener todo el programa Todos a Aprender y los ejes de calidad trabajando de la mano para entender cómo avanza la dinámica en cada región de Colombia, qué debemos reforzar. Y obviamente con un programa que realizamos en conjunto con el Banco Mundial y que pudimos experimentar en Bogotá, la capital del país, Emociones para la Vida, y el programa Paso a Paso, abordar la realidad emocional de los jóvenes, hacer también un seguimiento muy importante al desarrollo nutricional, desde la primera infancia hasta la educación superior, con una vocación de trayectoria completa. Y también quiero resaltar que entre todos los esfuerzos que tenemos y retos del 2021, está que ningún niño se quede por fuera del sistema. Por eso estamos iniciando los procesos de matrícula, las campañas de búsqueda activa. Tuvimos una deserción que para hacer un año de pandemia, ese esfuerzo de habernos aliado con los gobernantes, con el sector privado, haber sumado recursos para estar muy cerca de cada familia, pero tenemos que seguirlo haciendo. Lograr las tasas de deserción más bajas, lograr la mejora del rendimiento académico, lograr un reencuentro efectivo es fundamental, y creo que esta coyuntura también ha puesto el foco en los jóvenes. Allí hemos redoblado esfuerzos, generado el colaboratorio de la educación superior y generado fondos que apoyan las familias, los estudiantes y las instituciones. Resumiendo, es un año para seguir trabajando en equipo. UNESCO y todas las organizaciones nos han dado magníficos lineamientos y experiencias. Tenemos que poder medir lo que estamos haciendo en nuestras escuelas, definir el impacto en la calidad, focalizarnos en ello y en todo el componente socioemocional, y no perder ni un minuto y seguir trabajando en generar confianza, en dar información a las familias, en trabajar con los gobiernos locales por lograr un regreso gradual, progresivo y seguro, y por tener siempre en agenda de primero el tema educativo y los derechos de las niñas y los niños.
Not a moment to waste, says Maria Victoria Angelou Gonzalez, the Minister of National Education for Colombia. Thank you so much for those remarks. And now we move on from South America, we go over all the way across to the ASEAN region and the Philippines to speak to Dr. Diosdado San Antonio, the Undersecretary for Curriculum and Instruction at the Department of Education of the Philippines. I'm grateful to you for joining us because I know it's very late where you are, and I really want to hear from you, Minister. In these, Undersecretary, in these hard times that we are facing with the pandemic, what has your Ministry of Education done to tackle the problem of safeguarding education during the COVID pandemic?
Thank you very much, Madam Nell, and good day to everyone, morning, afternoon, and evening to all participants of this wonderful virtual meeting. The Department of Education in the Philippines immediately made sure that the challenges of COVID-19 would be addressed as fast as we can. The Secretary of Education, Leonor Magtolis Briones, created a learning continuity plan in consultation with our stakeholders, internal stakeholders within the Department of Education and our partners from the development sector and non-government organizations, because we really wanted to make sure that continuity of learning happened, even if the COVID-19 was raging. And we wanted to be sure that as we make education available to the learners, we would be able to also take care of their safety. We would be able to protect them. Right now, there's a policy that we cannot actually have face-to-face classes until a vaccine is available. So what we did was to offer education via different modes of distance learning delivery. We also have the online mode, which is for learners whose families have access to the internet and technological gadgets. There's also a modular approach, which is digital for those without stable internet. But the most popular, because really there's an issue on internet connectivity is the use of printed self-learning modules. We actually had to streamline the curriculum. The previous curriculum had more than 15,000 learning competencies across grades from K to 12, and now we're using the most essential learning competencies that is about 40% of the old curriculum, because we really feel that during COVID-19, we have to be attentive to the most essential.
Absolutely.
You also are partnering?
What I'm hearing from you is that this is an all hands on deck, getting involved, getting stuck in, and making sure that you adhere to the priorities of the needs of your citizens. I am so grateful to you and your time and your commitment. I can hear it coming through the line. Undersecretary San Antonio, thank you so much for joining us and helping us understand. Now, from the Asian region to Eastern Africa, we have moved on. We're going all the way to Kenya to join the Director General of the Ministry of Education, Mr. Eliash Abdi Jalal. Thank you so much for being with me today. Minister, what strategies are you and your government spearheading during the particularly trying times? We've heard from our colleagues in Philippines. I want to know what you're doing in Kenya.
Thank you very much. Here in Kenya, just like the rest of the countries, when the pandemic came up, we closed our institutions on the 15th of March, and our schools and institutions were closed for a very long time. And immediately after that, we really came up with a lot of plans in terms of ensuring that learning continues. So we gradually opened our institutions from October with mainly the examination classes, and found out that the situation could be controlled because we came up with a COVID guideline for schools to follow and so on. So we were able to put measures in place, hand washing, programs, temperature checking in the schools. But I want to say that from 4th of January this year, we have fully opened our institutions, right from pre-primary to university education. And today is the 24th. We do not have any reported case of COVID in our institutions as we speak. And therefore, our institutions now, learning is going on. But also, just like other parts of the world, we also have virtual platforms. We have, we deliver lessons through radios, we deliver lessons through the internet, online learning, and other, avenues. When schools opened, we enacted a strong back to school campaign because
what I'm hearing from the Director General of the Ministry of Education, just to paraphrase, his focus clearly on being responsive, being reactive, and making sure that the government is able to respond to the cut and throws of the pandemic. I'm going to give you a few more moments there because I feel like you were rudely interrupted by the technology. Please do go on, make your final remarks.
Well, I was just saying that with the school, the institutions are fully back, but as you have reported earlier, education is also under attack in our region. There are some counties bordering Somalia where we have a lot of disturbances. There's a whole region. Kenya is made up of 8 regions. And one of the regions has almost 30% of the schools now, only one teacher. The rest of the teachers have fled. And we have those challenges also as a country, but we're giving a lot of psychosocial support to institutions so that learning also continues. And we're put
Director General, I'm loath to interrupt you, but I must move on. I'm just very grateful for your commitment and also for your reactive nature of your approach there in Kenya. Thank you so much for joining me, Eliash Abdi Jalal. Now, speaking of these difficult and sometimes problematic, dangerous and conflict regions, I want to move on now to get the voices of some global leaders, from the voices of some global leaders to the voices of some of the global youth, the people on whose behalf we're all advocating, while you are sat there watching me right now. I want to move to 2 youth advocates. I'm very excited about this. From the Education Above All Foundation. We are joined shortly by Hannah Al-Shahabi and Shoji Ahmed. Hello to you both. Now, you are both youth leaders, which means that you have your finger on the education pulse of your communities. And you chat to them, you talk to young people on what they think are the priorities that our leaders should be acting on. Hannah, let me start with you. Can crisis be turned into an opportunity? And if so, how? Hannah?
Thank you, Nell. I want to start by echoing Karen's powerful opening remarks. Thank you, Karen, for highlighting young people's power, agency, and imagination. We, the youth, know that without hope, drive, and joining hands with the global community, we cannot work towards positive transformation of our own societies and the world. Oftentimes, we're the ones most impacted by education systems, yet we're marginalized from the policy-making process, despite the power and potential to bring positive contributions to the table. It's only necessary that we're included in important discussions such as the one being hosted today. Our talk centers on the question of how the global community should approach building back education stronger and better in the post-pandemic recovery process. The answer lies in a recognition and, most importantly, application of accessible, inclusive, equitable, and quality education for all. We are fortunate to be able to host this discussion at the Shafallah Center for Children with Special Needs, a space that serves as a powerful example of what collective effort and true collaboration can do to safeguard everyone's right to inclusive, accessible, quality education, enabling every child and young person with power to meaningfully contribute to society and the world. To bring to today's discussion representative voices of youth from around the world, EAA youth advocates have consulted young people from Egypt to Italy to Sierra Leone to Malaysia and many others during this month. We asked them to share their experience of education during the pandemic and share with us all their suggestions and ideas on what we should prioritize as we build back education. Based on the consultation, here are our recommendations condensed into 5 thematic areas. 1, we want to prioritize inclusion, everyone, including the most marginalized and vulnerable, such as girls, those with disabilities, and those in conflict, such as refugees and internally displaced people. Everyone should be considered in the education recovery plan. We want education to be accessible, and as the pandemic has highlighted, our definition of accessibility must adapt to the times and include accessibility to technology and connectivity. 3, we understand that quality education needs to be properly financed, and education budgets should not be decreased or reallocated to other sectors. Education budgets should be protected. 4, we want to work together to build back education as a collaborated effort. And finally, we understand that our teachers and educational personnel are under pressure to ensure quality education for us. So we want to see stronger support for the education workforce, such as teachers. And now, I'd like to give the floor to my fellow youth advocate, Shogi, connected from Paris. Shogi, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Hannah. Hello, everyone. Now, as we are all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the institution necessary to sustain the foundations of the global societies, and therefore education is no exception, rather is one of the hardest hit. Education systems for the most marginalized were already under pressure before the COVID-19 pandemic due to the structural problems and the past failures. Now, we must realize that striving for a pre-pandemic world is not enough anymore. And we need a more root and branch changes in the mindset and, of course, in the practices. Now, in our consultation with youth from around the world, youth voiced their demands for prioritizing their education in a post-COVID world. For that, our voices must be heard. We demand a seat on the table as the group the most affected by education-related policies and the group that most vital to shaping the future, our future. Inclusion must be across all levels of education in policy-making processes, such as curriculum design, student representation in school committees, and of course, guaranteeing inclusion also requires ensuring accessibility to all these groups. The pandemic has drastically widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots, in those in rich countries with access to education and technology, and those without who are apparently being left behind. All states must understand that confronting the gap is essential to increase accessibility for the most marginalized, investing in technological resources, securing funds to education, and of course, local alongside global collaboration for those with the greatest need. Now, it is a moral responsibility for us all. Now, this is the vision that unites us as youth. This is what we need in order for the world to prevent a generational catastrophe. On the 9th of September 2020, EA, Protect Education in Insecurity and Conflict Program, PEIC, led a global advocacy on the inaugural International Day to Protect Education from Attack, along with the launch of a 3-year global campaign, Unite to Protect. Today, we young people ask you to join the Unite Protect allies to build back education together, stronger and better for all of us. Thank you so much.
Shoji Ahmed and Hannah Al-Shahabi, thank you so much for joining us from Paris and from Doha. Obviously, a lot that we need to focus on, a lot of issues that young people are raising. So far, we have outlined the problem. We know what is the on the line here for everybody. And that's some really interesting points. And thank you for sharing your experiences and your wishes and desires. But we now turn to the people who can do something about it, I hope. The global policymakers and the technical experts to see what solutions we can come up with. And first, I'd like to turn to Mr. Robert Jenkins, Associate Director of Education at UNICEF. I'm grateful to have you here with us today. Mr. Jenkins, let's get straight to the brass tacks of it, actually. You've just heard from Hannah and Shoji about the truth and the sober reality of what it's going to take, the effort it's going to take, everybody, to get these large-scale blanket closures of education systems around the world in some sort of perspective. What do you think, Associate Director? Has these lockdowns been worth it?
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate all the comments and thanks for having me. So at the height of the pandemic, the disruption of schools affected 1.6 billion enrolled children, over 90% of the global student population. I mean, these were numbers that we would have were unthinkable before this pandemic. So the scale of the challenge was phenomenal. What I take from the two youth advocates and others, including Her Excellency from Colombia, are 3 points. And these are 3 points that we see globally and that we feel are part of the solution as we all work together to address the impact of the pandemic on education. One is inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. It's come up a lot already. How do we reach the marginalized children that were marginalized before the pandemic, and now that that has been exacerbated? And it's really an all hands on deck in every community, in every school, in every household, but in every country and globally.
To interrupt very rudely there, I want to understand, how are we going to do that? We've spoken a lot about the things that needs to be done. I'm turning to you, Mr. Jenkins, because I think you might have an idea of how. We're not allowed to touch one another. We're not allowed to be in classrooms anymore. Schools are a contentious point in the West and the global South. Exactly how do we do that? How do we bring education when we can't even be near one another?
So I think currently, if you're in a community or in a school that is closed, we see some amazing innovations to reach all children, employing a whole wide range of technology, whether that is more towards the lower end, like supporting teachers to deliver learning materials to marginalized remote communities, all the way up through using the radio, through the television, through IT-enabled tools. So employing every tool we have at our disposal to reach all children in every community. Then as schools reopen, very proactively understand what are the challenges that each and every child is facing to come back to school, how to adequately support them to bridge them back into school, and very importantly, catch up with their learning. We see those interventions across the world very exciting.
You said before, Mr. Jenkins, quote, "The benefits of schools remaining open far outweigh the costs of closing them." What else do schools do that makes saying something like that the right thing to do, or the right outlook? And is that what you think at UNICEF?
I'm really glad you mentioned that because, of course, many of us here in the panel are from the education background, so we think learning, learning, learning, but we need to always continually remind ourselves that schools provide a whole wide range of services that are currently those services need to reach children while their schools are closed, but also as we plan for the reopening, that full range of services needs to be ramped up and ensure that the reach every child. Now, so what are those services? It starts, of course, with school meals, nutritional support that is incredibly necessary at the moment, but also was mentioned by a few other speakers already, the psychosocial needs of children, the mental health needs of children, a sense of safety and protection and belonging and interaction. So schools, I think one thing about this pandemic and the disruption of schools has reminded us how comprehensive and how important in a very holistic way schools are to children. And we need to accelerate and deepen that as we plan and implement reopening.
Robert Jenkins, Associate Director of Education at UNICEF. We hear you loud and clear.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you. Really appreciate the insight that UNICEF brings, and we will continue to look for UNICEF to make the call that education needs to be prioritized as societies emerge from lockdowns and restrictions. Okay, are you still with me? I hope you are. I've got a lot more show coming your way. Next on the hot seat, or the hot Zoom window, I don't know what the correct way to say that is yet, is Dr. Suzanne Grant-Lewis, the Director of UNESCO IIEP. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Suzanne. Now, we heard from Robert that schools need to reopen and need to reopen quick, but when does reopening schools, how can we make sure that when the schools are open, that we build back that education much better than before? Because as some of our speakers have said, it wasn't great before the pandemic, and the pandemic has exacerbated so much of it.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you all. Let me cover the what is resilience, why we need it, and how to go about it. So in education, we're talking about resilience, the ability of families, children, communities, and systems to withstand, adapt to, and recover from shocks and stresses. And we need to strengthen education system resilience for two major reasons, because it enables countries to respond to the immediate challenges of safely reopening schools, as the UN Secretary General has called for. And second, to anticipate and mitigate the impact of future crises. So how do we go about doing this? I'd highlight three interconnected things. First, reinforcing capacities for risk management. So this means things like having a crisis and risk management policy or strategy for the education sector, having sufficient financial and human resources to implement it, and thirdly, put in place a dedicated team of education staff that are actually responsible for managing risks and responding when crises occur. The second element is addressing inequities, because this is very important for building resilient education systems. It's also our common moral imperative to strive to overcome patterns of inequity and exclusion in education, which Rob referred to. And we can do this through remedial learning, school health, nutrition programs, and additional support for the most vulnerable. And these include girls, learners with disabilities, refugee and IDP youth and children. The final element, I'd say, is we have to ensure strong collaboration and coordination among all the stakeholders. We have seen its importance at all levels of the system, including with the health sector. So this means engaging teachers, parents, and school leaders in education decision-making, as we just heard our youth advocates advocate for. But it also means enhancing collaboration at the global level. UNESCO's Global Education Coalition provides a platform for collaboration and exchange for more than 140 organizations to protect the right to education and to ensure that learning never stops.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suzanne Grant-Lewis, Director at UNESCO IIEP, just telling us it's no longer education, education, education. It's now resilience, resilience, resilience, a message we can take on board as we get into the next bit of this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much, Doctor. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic came at a time when refugee flows and forced displaced people was at an unacceptably high level. I am an Afghan refugee. Well, I was an Afghan refugee, and my family fled the war in Afghanistan in 1994 to come here to London in the UK. I would not be sitting here speaking to you if it wasn't for education. None of this would be around me. My life would be so different. It actually makes me very emotional. So I want you guys, those of you watching, to take a moment and really listen to your emotions, listen to your drive, listen to the passionate reasons why you are here today. We have all made a commitment to make education a priority and speak up for those like Khalil at the top of the webinar, and like me when I was a child, who do not have a voice. Just hold on to that as we continue through the webinar. Okay, so we know we need to think about how to safeguard the right to education for the refugee population and other marginalized groups. So it's crucial that we now hear from Dr. Mamadou Diane Boldi, who is the Deputy Director of the Division of Resilience and Solutions at the UNHCR. Dr. Mamadou, thank you so much for being here with us. I want to ask you, considering now that this pandemic has hit at a time of huge global displacement with the refugee crisis, what would you say is the biggest barrier and then the biggest opportunity for refugee access to education during the pandemic?
Thank you, Nell. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that very inspiring remarks. The barriers that refugee children face in accessing education are many, and they have been exacerbated by the fact that refugee children are forced to flee their homes in search of safety, and you just refer to that. The problem is that COVID has placed an additional burden on many refugee families and communities, decimating their capacity to be self-sufficient and reducing their ability to pay for both the direct and the indirect cost of educating their children. But before the pandemic, because we should not only speak about the pandemic, only 77% of refugee children attended primary school, 31% secondary school, and even lower level when it comes to girls, and 3% tertiary education, well below global averages for educational access. Our work with the Malala Fund has shown that if COVID continues as it has, close to half of refugee children and refugee girls will not be reopening schools. Of course, UNHCR is working very intensively with government like those on the call, government of Kenya, Colombia, and several partners such as Education Above All, UNICEF, UNESCO, in responding to this. We've been able to include refugee children in government responses. We have been supporting refugee children access in lessons on local and community radios. We've been engaging teachers to train parents on how to use digital educational resources. All of that is happening in Lebanon, Kenya, Sudan, and several other countries. But I have to say that it is not enough. All this good work is not enough. What we need to make sure is, first of all, to change the policies so that the refugees are included in government responses. And this will not happen if we do not have the partnership as called by the Global Compact Refugees of the youth, lawmakers, journalists to make it happen. And only this way will we be able to really respond to these growing challenges.
Dr. Mamadou Diane Boldi, the Deputy Director of the Division of Resilience and Solutions at the UNHCR, saying the work is good, but we can do better. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Now, we've heard from education policymakers about how to rebuild education systems, but a critical issue for us is the here and now, and that means the vaccine. There are some bright lights of hope ahead of us in the development of several vaccines to combat the pandemic. But with this hope comes the challenge of distribution. Ensuring we can reach the most vulnerable parts of our global society is going to be absolutely key. And who better to talk about this than Marie-Ange Sarakayo, who is the Managing Director of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Marie-Ange, thank you so much for being with us. Right, let's get straight to it. Why should governments and leaders classify teachers as key priority class to get the vaccine first, to make sure that schools open and to avoid further disruption. But more importantly, who doesn't agree with that statement? It seems very common sense to me.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. Indeed, I really think that Gavi, the Education Above All Foundation, and all our country partners are really committed to protect children's health through vaccination. Of course, with the raging pandemic, with other health experts, Gavi is supporting a mechanism called COVAX, which is the only global mechanism to ensure that everyone has access to the COVID-19 vaccines. More than 190 countries joined COVAX, including Qatar. So to your questions, everyone around the globe agrees that getting access to the vaccine at the right time and also at an efficient price is a priority. So for our population. The goal, of course, is to first end the acute phase of this pandemic we are in and really provide billions of doses globally. So COVAX committed to provide at least 2 billion doses globally before the end of the year to tackle the critical population and really help people's life and economies return to normal as soon as possible. And we heard through the testimony earlier and through the videos and the great speakers how important it is. So of course, for children, the normal life, of course, is to go back to school to continue their education. And minimizing the burden of illness through COVID-19 vaccination will positively affect a child's ability to return to school and attain higher education levels. So to answer your questions, the first priority first is really health workers, nurses, and doctors, which are the first line of defense, you would agree, who interact closely with the public and to protect lives, to save people's lives. They are in the first line of defense and they are prioritized at the very, very early stage of the pandemic. But other high-level groups are also being brought in line to actually being able to help restore the economy and also restart normal life. So for this reason, COVAX and all the partners countries, these 190 countries, are really looking actively to vaccinate sooner some groups depending on the unique situation. So for instance, in places, as we have heard earlier, that there are great ideas about innovation, about being able to do things differently, in places where online working is limited, or in some of the settings that have been discussed, in refugees and so on, clearly where children learning is impacting due to school closures or lockdown or other circumstances, countries will look at how to address this issue, to provide protection for teachers to return to the classrooms so that not to jeopardize the development of young children.
And that is the priority of Gavi, and I know it. And I thank you, Marie-Ange Sarakayo, Managing Director of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, for helping us understand that everyone wants a vaccine. We can't give it all at the same time, but we must prioritize with our hearts as well as our minds. I appreciate that. Thank you for your time. And I'd just like to make a note that Education Above All, through the EAC program, has partnered with Gavi and UNICEF on a project that will deliver immunization in Nigerian communities where UNICEF and Educate a Child are already providing quality primary education. We've learned a lot, haven't we, since we started this journey an hour or so ago. Next, and another critical factor in building back education is, of course, money. Finances that are needed to maintain the education that we want the young people to have in the face of what is looking like a global recession, if not a depression. Now, we are joined by Mr. Fazil Rabbani. You are the GPE Senior Country Lead for Kenya, for Uganda, South Sudan, Eritrea, and Lesotho. So thank you for joining me. Now, of course, a strong recovery from COVID-19 means a lot of things for many people, but one of the main things to ensure it is financial stability in short supply. It's likely to be for the entire world. Can this pandemic be an opportunity to ensure better long-term financing for education that's been sorely lacking globally up until this point? What do you make of it, Mr. Rabbani?
Thank you very much for your question, Nell. And you are absolutely right. Money is fundamental to whatever we are discussing today. As a partnership and as a fund, GP is in the business of transforming education. So it's not only the money, it's how we use money and how we invest money in our countries that is key to us. And I want to use a second to establish the track record of GPE that since 2002, we have supported 160 million children, additional children come to education systems across our partner countries. Half of them are girls. And because of GP support, 67 million more students now have access to better trained teaching in their classrooms, which is an impressive result. And we have done it through support from our partner countries who provides financing to us. At the same time, we have innovative financing mechanism that brings in additional money to the sector. GP Multiplier Fund is one of those, which provides matching grant to countries. We provide some money, then the matching grants come from other sources. And we have raised almost $1 billion since 2018 in the last 3 years. Yeah, that's brilliant. But our track record is re-established. The effectiveness of the track record is re-established in our response to COVID-19. And we have mobilized almost $500 million within a very short period of time, 4 to 5 months time, for our countries so that they can continue learning for their children and they can do the planning for mitigating the further impacts, negative impacts of COVID, including the impact on education financing. And you have rightly pointed out that financing is becoming more problematic. Hannah has mentioned one of the issues of financing, that domestic financing may come down. And we share that concern. Education budgets are at risk in countries. At the same time, we know the household incomes may drop. That means support from households, support from communities to schools will drop. And if it's coupled with a drop in international aid in education, we are in a very dire situation. But the good thing is that GP 2025, which is our new strategy, is focusing exactly on those 3 areas. So we will work with countries to make sure the volume, effectiveness, and efficiency of domestic financing is at the core of our investment.
It's at the core, and when people like you work toward, Mr. Rabbani, when people like you work towards getting money to mix with education, wonderful things can happen. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you very much.
Now, another thing we need to make sure that another thing that we need that is a pillar, in fact, of education going forward is going to be technology. It's absolutely crucial to learning in any format in the post-COVID-19 pandemic era. We need things like distant learning, for one. Yet unequal access to technology can also vastly exacerbate the existing gaps between the haves and the have-nots. And that doesn't just mean those in the global north and the global south, because great disparities exist right here in the UK, in London, where I'm broadcasting to you from right now. So we are joined by Dr. Rukmini Banerjee, who is the CEO of the organization called Pratham. Pratham has been a pioneer in providing access to technological infrastructure and access to communication networks, all important buzzwords that Dr. Banerjee is going to put in context for us now. Doctor, we often think that technology is a panacea. We think that it can solve almost any problem that we have in education, but there are real obstacles that you are trying to tackle when it comes to embedding technology into the new learning environment, and there may even be some missed opportunities for millions around the world. What is on the line here?
I think that the speakers, many have mentioned all the difficulties that we've been through. And I think that the sudden school closures and the uncertainty about when it will open has in many ways pushed us to try everything we can. And in the trying of everything we can, I think what is possible from remote, what is possible with digital immediately became clear, and what is not possible also became clear.
Right.
So in our own work in Pratham, the first thing we did was, of course, try to use and send messages that would reassure children, get them engaged in activities using WhatsApp or using smartphones. And very quickly, we realized that that would really reach only a minority and leave out many children. And so we, in a way, went back to old technologies, SMS. I think many, many more Indian families have old phones, basic phones. And we learned very quickly What can you do in 160 characters that can actually help children get something done during the day? We went back to radio. So I think that this immediate reactions made us realize that there are things that we can do today, but there are things that we need to get ready for in the future. And the mixture of these available possibilities, I think also helped. A big learning that we had is in the villages and in the communities where we work in India, where there were already groups of children who had been formed and who were operating before, or groups of mothers. They were able to actually take this and share resources much better. So we realized that the combination of the social structure and the technology was really a powerful combination, and that it's really human beings helping each other and using different technology that are possible and available, but in a shared and collective way that could really help us at this time. So while technology can solve many problems, I think groups of human beings can solve even more problems. Technology can be a two-way mechanism. We soon started getting a lot of stuff from children from these groups, which we could share with other children. So I would say that this has just been a very fast learning experience, not easy, not linear, but I think that the world has accelerated in a way in trying to figure out what is possible.
I absolutely love that. A very hopeful but pragmatic approach to technology. Throwing an iPad at the problem is not always going to solve the problem at hand. Dr. Rukmini Banerjee, CEO of Pratham, thank you so much for your comments and wise words. We now hear from we have so far heard from global leaders and policymakers. Now I want to turn your attention to the grassroots voices from across the globe. This is going to be interesting. We are going to Kenya, Gaza, Turkey in the next few moments. We're going to go to Kenya first, if I might. And we're going to connect with Mercy Musomi. She is the Executive Director of Girl Child Network in Kenya. Mercy, are you there? I want to ask you a really specific question. We've heard so much from the global leaders, from Robert Jenkins and from everybody else about the things that need to happen, about the ambitions that we have to have. Are you seeing any of this translate into real work in real time?
Thank you very much for this session, and thank you for your passion on what you're doing. I appreciate. Girl Child Network has been at the grassroots level, working with the communities, working with the schools, working with women groups, working with the men groups, and working with frontline workers and teachers themselves. What we've done, because we don't have technology in our country, is not as developed as your countries, but we have something that we have used. There's something we call Family Matters program, where we work to flag out child protection issues, and we conduct mediation at household level. This is during this COVID, so many children were out of school. So we put them together into groups, and we had mediation sessions on how they can work towards getting to learn even at home in whatever situation they were in. We've also been using the community resource persons. We have the community resource persons that we cluster in every community, and those ones who have gone to school use their phones, use their whatever they have to make sure that the children still remain in school, and it has worked well for us. Of course, we have our village tracking committees, a program heavily and well funded by Educate a Child. And what we've done with the village tracking committees is to work with them to ensure they can go to the households, to the family, at the family level, to make sure what the parents don't have, they can provide in terms of having the children, using the solar lamps that we have provided to the children to make sure they can organize lessons in the evening, because some families don't have electricity. So we use the solar lamps to make sure we can get there, and we are working in the best way possible. We also have something else very exciting that we are doing with the communities out there, if there are moments. We also do what we are calling the theater for development. We put our children together, and because we don't have the technology that is in the West, but through Theater for Development, we are able to put our children together. Those young people youth who are in the phase one of the project come and take the children through. They admire watching Theatre for Development, but they sit down and also do some learning. It has been exciting. We have also use of radios. We negotiate with the parents to give the children the radios to listen to them. As Elia said, they have government programs which the children listen through the radio. And
what I'm hearing, Mercy, is the sheer passion, dedication, and refusal to hear no that is necessary for organizations like Girl Child Network in Kenya to do their astonishing work. Thank you so much for reporting to us what grassroots voices are saying on the front line. Thank you, Mercy.
Thank you.
So we now turn to hear about the experience of leaders and students in a different sector, in the tertiary part of the education process. You've heard multiple times that the number of children that make it to secondary and tertiary education reduces massively after primary level education. So further education and higher education sectors have been hit hard by COVID-related restrictions and closures. So what is going on in that scene? I want to turn to Leon Botstein, who's the Dean of Bard College, a private liberal arts institute in New York State in Eastern America. Leon, what exactly, I think we have a video of this. Do we have a video?
I think we do.
Let's go. Oh, there you are, Mr. Leon. I thought I couldn't tell if I had you there or not.
I'm here.
What's happening to the liberal arts? I mean, we've heard from Mercy the importance of making sure that art and theatre and all these things are at the heart of what we do in a post-COVID-19 pandemic. But what are your students going through? What are the difficulties you're facing?
Well, we deal mostly with young people who are in secondary school, and also those, we run 8 high schools in 6 inner cities in the United States. And we also have a college, which begins after the finishing of high school. So we deal with an age group from about 14 to 22. And, this is when people become young adults, and they have to deal with people who are not the same as themselves. They have to confront all the sort of dissonances about what's right and wrong in the world. And they have to learn, and they learn serious stuff. And they have to do it if they're going to enter the professions. So we're looking at making the pipeline between secondary schools and college stronger. And the truth is, technology is helpful, but the fact is there's no replacement for teaching in real person. What we've discovered in the pandemic is the loss is tremendous. Teaching is a human act. Making music is a human act, and theater is a human act, and being in the same place, dancing is a human act. That this medium is an erosion of a sense of democracy, community, and freedom. So the fact is that technology will help. We've learned how to use it. But we also have a big program for higher education for prisoners, incarcerated people. And that's very important. And that's been the most hard because they don't have access to technology.
I want to ask you another question, Leon, if I might. I know we don't have too much time, but this is so important. So much of what we have talked about is pen on paper. It's the education part. But we've mentioned a few times the importance of schools in other capacities. For some, it's to get away from violence or problems at home. For others, it's the only meal that they will eat.
Get fed, right. Shelter, yeah.
Quite. When we lose those things, what are the markers that we are going to have to be so aware of after the schools open, after everyone is vaccinated? What do we as educators?
I think we're going to face a fantastic demand, a really aggressive demand for what people have been deprived at, and to compensate. Schools at night, schools over the summer, we're going to have to go 24/7. Wow. And the other thing is that we're trying to develop an open society university network where people from all over the world can get on a platform which mixes technology and in-person, what we call blended learning. But the human act of teaching and learning will experience an incredible revival. People will be angry that they don't have it, and they're right to be angry.
I completely hear you. Leon Botstein, Dean of Bard College, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now we move over we are going to Gaza and then to Turkey to hear about the experience of higher education leaders and students in a very different context. First up, Dr. Bassem Al-Saqqa, you are the Dean of the Islamic University of Gaza. As the Dean of Higher Education Institute, I want to understand the impact that the pandemic has had on the university in Gaza and its students already facing challenging circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much, and salam for everybody. Indeed, I agree with all my colleagues about the impacts on children and school pupils, but I'm here to speak about the impacts of the pandemic on university and university students. As you know, due to the pandemic, universities are forced to close the campuses and cancel classes so that students are asked to continue classes via e-learning. We in Gaza, and due to the siege we have suffered for the past 14 years, have many challenges concerning the online learning. Actually, all the institutions, and my institution especially, do a lot to improve the online learning system. For example, we in the Islamic University, we had a small e-learning center, but after the pandemic, we are forced to enhance this center for about 8 more persons to deal with such a fast demand on the e-learning, and also we are forced to purchase more equipment necessary for the requirements of the increasing demands on online learning.
Are you able to do this, Dr. Bassem? Do you have the resources? And because the challenges are quite acute and different for where you are.
Actually, we suffered to have such equipment, but at the least we have succeeded to do the required equipment, and we purchased actually all the equipment necessary to deal with such a situation. Also, we are forced to have intensive training sessions for the academic staff members, because before the pandemic, not all the staff members have the required skills to deal with the e-learning at all. Also, we have the main challenge we face, and we still face, is how to deal with the assessment system for students, because to have exams outdoor of the campuses have many challenges and have many effects, negative effects. This is the challenges the university suffer. What about the impact on students?
Yes.
Actually, students suffer a lot from being far from the university campuses.
Well, I'm going to actually speak to a student, but before I do, I want to thank you for highlighting another key issue. It's the training and retraining of our teachers and other staff members that is as pivotal to any successful launch of any initiative. Dr. Bassem Al-Saqqa, Dean of Islamic University of Gaza, thank you so much for illuminating that for us.
Thanks a lot.
Now, let's move on to a student in Gaza. I have the pleasure of being joined by Abdullah Abu Namus.
Hello.
Hi. As a student during the pandemic, I want to know, can you elaborate on the impact that it's had on your education? We've heard a little bit about exams and things like that, but what about things like being a student, hanging out with your friends, going out, doing life?
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, whenever you are. My name is Abdullah Al-Fakhour, a student and also a registered nurse and a teacher assistant at Islamic University of Gaza Strip. As some speaker mentioned that the education in vulnerable communities was so fragmented and weak before COVID-19, and it got worse with the outbreak, especially regarding e-learning. Many challenges that my colleagues and I faced during COVID-19 e-learning system is electricity cut off, poor internet access, and the most significant one is engagement in e-learning process. Students don't have the capacity to operate such a platform, whereas universities don't have enough infrastructure and the capacity to enhance engagement in e-learning process. So ultimately, there was a huge gap in engagement and communication between students and teachers. As a result of that, to help myself, my colleagues, and nursing students in university, I made my YouTube channel where I could keep up students to keep up their study in nursing field, as long as posting some articles about our psychological well-being and resilience. Facebook sessions of question and answer included some concerns and frequent questions about COVID-19 and e-learning, and also made some tutorial videos to help students develop set of skills that will help them with this new environment. My recommendation as a student and also as a teacher at university, we need to prepare next generation for next catastrophe and build back education. So we need to invest in e-learning. First, students, teacher, parents need to be trained in digital skills, psychosocial learning, and also promoting human well-being and resilience. Second, we need to create a platform that enhance engagement between students and teacher and bring academic community back together. So students is a right for everyone. It's not a privilege. And thank you so much for your attention.
Student, teacher, YouTube sensation, Abdullah Abu Namus there. Thank you so much for your comments, Abdullah, very much appreciated. Now, conflict was a major issue during the pandemic with a call for a global ceasefire by the United Nations Secretary General. Earlier during the pandemic, he made it clear that if we're going to get through this, conflict must end. Now, humanitarian principles and action that prioritize individual human needs, including access to education, has become more important than ever before. Now we are joined by Ala Shawaf, a Syrian refugee student who is a beneficiary of İHA in Turkey. Could you tell us, Ala, what your experience has been of the pandemic in terms of your access to education? What has been done to overcome these hurdles? If I have Ala there, I will go to her now. Ala.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me now?
I can. Please go on.
I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Ala Shawaf. I live in Turkey with a temporary protection identity. And as a Syrian refugee, there is nothing permanent. At the same time, I'm a student at Istanbul University. As we know, the education has become online because of COVID-19, which has spread throughout the world. And one of the most challenging parts of adapting to COVID-19 has been social distancing and quarantining at home. In this condition, everything was hard to manage. Yet the hardest to me is quarantining. Because the place where I live, there is no specific space to study. There are many people living there with me. Our online classes are a nightmare. Yes, and our classes, it's getting worse by the interruption, poor internet, because we have and the noises, no privacy, because and this is very devastating and psychologically frustrating me, because it's affecting my grades. Thus, living this way will for sure spread the virus if only one person gets sick, and this is dangerous. So, İHA and education of all have built a dorm for Syrian female refugee student like me, and this dorm is going to support me with a safe environment where I can live space to study, and will provide me with the internet. So, in the most important thing to me, and I'm sure to all students, which is how the dorm is going to support, to be close to university, and that will save a lot of time and energy and money. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ala. That's very, very well put. It's not just the desire or the will or the access, sometimes you need to make sure that it's quality access. In your case, you were obviously a bright, intelligent, ambitious woman who wants to work and do well. But that can only be helped if the global community steps up. And I can absolutely hear that in your voice. Thank you so much, Ala Shawaf. Moving on, we are here with Hussein Uruh of the IHH Relief Foundation. Welcome to you, Mr. Hussein. From a humanitarian perspective, can you tell us a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on the communities experiencing conflict and people just like Ala?
Yes, thank you very much, Nilüfer. Best wishes from Istanbul. Actually, today I want to talk about more solution for the refugees living in Turkey. As all of you know, the Turkey is the biggest population, refugee population, about 50% of the whole population living in Turkey, and the many in Istanbul. And we have a joint solution for the Syrian refugees and others, not limited with the Syrians or other international students. I like to tell something about that. First, I like to thank Education Above All Foundation for this webinar. And also I like to thank the Fakura team for their very hard work with IHH for education, especially for the Syrian students. We have started very good projects with them in Istanbul. Despite the COVID situation and social restriction occurred last year in the world, IHH and Al-Fakura signed an agreement in the middle of the pandemic on the March 2022 to build two dormitories in Istanbul, mainly for Syrian refugees. Actually, we have started for solution on the beginning of the pandemic. We don't have a time to wait. And we have established two dormitories. As well, we call these two dormitories, not a dormitory, Center of Peace and Excellence, in provision of the safe place during the female Syrian refugee students' education in Istanbul, along with the basic life necessities, student services, psychological support, extra coaching, mentoring, consulting, skill development, leadership, networking, communication, managerial skills, and after these alumni activities. Fulfillment of the need of accommodation through providing a dormitory and the social and psychological support will give the female students a chance to continue their education and live in a better, healthy, and a safe environment, and making them feel that there are people in London, in Doha, in Turkey, care of them and let them feel secure, motivated, and confident as much as possible.
Yes.
The last, I like to invite all of you to see what we have done with Al-Fakura in Istanbul. We have a very short video. I want to introduce that video for all the participants. Thank you very much. Nurhat, thank you.
thank you so much there. I mean, it looks good enough to move in, as far as I'm concerned. That level of dedication and commitment to help others who are not of the same nation, who do not perhaps look like you or sound like you, who are diverse to you, who are different to you, is the energy and the vibe that we are bringing to 2021. I feel really energized by everything that I've heard and seen here from all of our contributors across the globe. And I know you feel energized too, because that's just the kind of conversation we've had so far. We've learned a lot, we've heard a lot, some of it quite emotional stuff. And we've crisscrossed the entire globe to brainstorm solutions. From our base in Qatar at the Shafala School, we have reached out to South America, to Eastern Africa, to the ASEAN region, to the Middle East, as well as to New York and to Paris. We have searched for an answer to the question that we posed in order to build back education. We've learned that prioritizing school openings, that focusing on the most marginalized, ensuring equal access to technology are crucial to any success that we will have together. Listening to all our wonderful young speakers who have challenged us to do more and to do better from our diverse range of perspectives has also been key. We now head over to the Shafala Center for Children with Special Needs in Doha, where our live audience has been watching proceedings on a large screen, socially, safely distanced, of course, with the CEO of the Education Above All Foundation. Mr. Fahad Al-Sulaiti, who I believe is going to be making the closing remarks. I think he's there on standby right now with our moderator at the Shafala Center, Anud Al-Kawari. Anud, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Nell. This has been a very interesting and thought-provoking event that we have all enjoyed and enjoyed taking part of here at Shafala Center for Children and Special Needs in Doha, Qatar. And now we would like to welcome Mr. Fahad Al-Sulaiti, CEO of Education Above All Foundation, who has worked so hard alongside his team to bring about this inspiring event. Mr. Fahad Al-Sulaiti.
Good morning, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to start to thank my team, Education Above All Foundation, for their hard work, really. And I would like to thank our youth advocates, all have been supported and have made this amazing, I will call it, event. I would like to thank, special thanks to our moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your support. Today, on the 3rd International Education Day, Building Back Education, we have heard today from a range of voices, global leaders, academics, policymakers, youth, and artists. We operate in more than 50 countries around the world. EAA is proud to work in Colombia, where its project with our partners aim to enroll 54,000 the most marginalized out-of-school children and children at risk. We have been provided access to quality education, primary education in Kenya since 2012. With our partners, Child Network, UNHCR, and UNICEF, we are providing education opportunity for more than 79,000 out-of-school children, with over 500,000 of these children already enrolled in Kenya. We all heard today about the dome that we have seen, which is we are very, very proud about it. This will host 940 female Syrian refugee students over the period of the 10 years. You have also heard from EA youth advocates today and the global artists. EA is committed to awards, including youth, on all our partnership and advocacy. This to ensure that those who are most affected by the COVID will lead and be empowered by transform their society and create opportunities to building back education. So now, it's given me a great pleasure to introduce Imi Muhammad, who's a young Sudanese. Imi Goodwill Ambassador for UNHCR. Please, the floor to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Imtithal or Emi Mahmoud. Thank you so much for the introduction. Really, really glad to be joining you. And I just have to say it's been really inspirational to hear everyone speak, and I'm really glad to be representing UNHCR today. I think, you know, in global health, we say one of the biggest indicators for the life expectancy of a child is the education level of the mother. So it's very interesting to know that when we talk about education, it really is life and death for a lot of people. And it means a lot to be able to tell you guys you really are trying to help save our lives. And I know that because I experienced it personally. I'm going to share this poem. It's called The Schoolhouse, and I hope you find as much meaning in it as I did writing it. Thank you. The fire burned all night as we sang songs of change, huddled close by the east side of the school. How the baobab trees would scrape the sky, how the water would reach down to the root of the well, how the sand ran red with flecks of gold, how the English came and left their mark, each village a land of living ghosts, the grandpa who taught in the time of Nimeri, the aunt born at the start of a 30-year overdue uprising. The wind blew shards that night, cutting our voices short, dicing through our frantic conversation, our stories told from every corner of our land. The medical students made fun of the humanities kids. I, a visitor of both worlds, a settler of none, found myself clamped tightly between a group of girls who pulled me close without question, who wrapped me tight in the embrace of hope. Our hearts turned all outward until the meaty bits shone, damp and bloodied by our sheer audacity to still bleed love into this place that swallowed us whole and spit us out generations later, still fighting for our lives. We slept in 2 huts by the north side of the school, and the boys all huddled under the roofless place, where in the morning students would gather each day, 4 walls and the hot sun beating down on their hungry backs. But not tomorrow. Tomorrow comes and I stand at the front of the schoolhouse. No windows, no door, no roof, 4 walls, 1 chalkboard, 8 benches. The sky is auburn that morning, turned sheet white with the creeping sun. My students crammed in with every teacher, parent, sheikh, engineer, sister we could find. A green scarves of change wrapped gently around our necks, doubled as masks to keep the dust out when we marched ever eastward toward the capital. Our journey of 1,000 miles began with a single desk. Me standing at the front, tongue-tied, core shaken by the magnitude of what we were doing. The words wouldn't leave my mouth. I've stood on both sides of the classroom before, but this time, unsure of what to say, I closed my eyes. Old memories of studying under the burning sun staved off only by the cool shade of the trees outside our homes competed in my mind with recent days spent climbing the white stone steps of my university. Such a stranger I felt to my own life, visitor of both worlds, settler of none. In that moment, I pushed back against decades that pressed down on my shoulders and the shoulders of those before me. I peeled back the weight of oppression. I unwrapped entire layers of grief. I unpacked and unlearned until I could see the girl I once was staring straight up at me from another life. And I looked past her to see the little girls who are looking up at me now from the roofless classroom in the middle of that little town beyond the hills of El Fasher. Is this what it means to be human? To have a second chance at life in the ones that follow? To make mistakes so that the younger ones don't have to feel that hope is lost only to discover that it lies dormant, resting, waiting for the moment we dare to acknowledge her. There is a silencing that happens in our lives. Curiosity is something we're born with, and somewhere between the cradle and grave, we lose that will to speak up. bursting at the seams to share, yet lacking the full capacity. Children will literally invent words to describe the things they don't have the language for. And yet us, fully grown and minds brimming from a life full of learning, have the capacity to express volumes, but we bite our tongues, whether it be from shock, hopelessness, violence, fatigue, the subtle assertion over time that we don't matter, that our words don't matter, that it's always been this way. Whether it be from love lost or tragedy found, or fear in the simplest terms, we lose something. But not today, not anymore. So I spoke, and I still speak. I speak for the mother who couldn't write. I speak for the hunger in every child. I speak for the villages, the cities, the states. I speak for the will to reimagine it all. I speak for the little girl who wanted to grow up and be a poet. I speak for her pen. I speak for her friends. I speak for the day we can reawaken the hope in every child. I walked, we sang, we marched, thousands joined us. I came back, I put a roof on that school. Ms. Zainab, the principal, said it was just in time for the rainy season. But if we hadn't called, they would have been taking the kids 25 kilometers away a day just for the chance to learn. A year later, the dictator fell, but the roof is still standing. A year later, I can hear the voices echo off the walls. Rain falling on a tin roof and landing on a brand new day. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely fantastic. That is exactly what we're talking about. Emmy, absolutely blowing my socks off, frankly. I don't even know what I'm saying next. I'm so moved by the wonderful poem you just read. Thank you so much, Emmy. Now let's head back to the Shafala Center to look at the Building Back Education exhibition. This is going to be fun. Check this out.
Hello, we are excited to present this beautiful exhibition right here made by local artists and youth advocates. Every distinctive piece right here represents different sides and paths in our path to deliver education and build back education. The first piece is presented by Bashir al-Mullah, who wanted to showcase the inner struggles that a lot of people go through in order to find themselves in a sea of chaos. In a broader perspective, it reflects the mental health issues that we face as individuals and our relationship with ourselves. As we all know, during the pandemic, mental health took a huge toll. And because of that, even though everything moved to a virtual space, our ability to process that virtual space became quite an issue, as all of this has been quite new and our relationship with ourselves is quite complicated. Moving on to the external struggles, we have the second piece, which focuses on the challenges and hurdles a lot of children face when trying to access education, beginning with social challenges such as child marriage, to wars and conflicts and the causes of climate change. And with the pandemic, these issues were further exacerbated and forced a lot of children out of schools, out of these safe environments. And although everything has moved to a virtual space, it is still very much inaccessible to a lot of children. As for the last piece, it presents what we hope education brings about to society. In 2017, in our participation in WISE, we asked the participants to write in each block what they believe education unlocks. So you have some of these blocks reflecting on support, empowering the youth, inspiring, and all these visions and missions combined, although it's one block a piece, when put together, it creates a solid foundation in which education resides and elevates children and societies. And although these visions were written in 2017, 4 years later, we are very much hoping to fulfill these visions and are working very hard in meeting them. And now, I would like to thank you all for joining us here at Shafala Doha Center and handing it over to Nel. Thank you so much.
Absolutely delightful. Thank you for that wonderful tour of the exhibition. That's all the time that we have, folks. I want to thank our phenomenal speakers. I want to thank the Education Above All Foundation, and you've seen just a tiny amount of the work that they put in. A huge thank you to the Shafala Center and to all of you watching around the world. Be heard, get involved, make your comments, be part of the global drive to build back education. Use the hashtag build back education. that we've been talking about all day, to make sure that you're part of the conversation. I do want to know what you think. Yes, you watching right now. It's been my absolute pleasure to host today's event. Thank you all. Be safe, stay connected, and let's keep learning.